A very good evening and a warm welcome to NDLI Club's 21st Global Event. I'm Dr. Vignesh and I'm part of the National Digital Library of India team. As many of you are aware, the National Digital Library hosts over 8.5 crore knowledge resources in almost all subject domains. And to complement the usage of the National Digital Library, we have over 3,749 NDLI clubs that are operational with the primary objective to promote the culture of reading, especially among the young generation. And today we are going to have a session on this very important topic on the training and life of a civil servant. So the topic is very timely and apt as the UPSC has just published the civil service examination results for this year. And there has been a lot of excitement because a lot of people want to know what is it going to be, how the training is going to be, what is the life of a civil servant is going to be. And we are very pleased to listen on this topic from Dr. Sanjeev Chopra, who was the director of the Lal Bahadur Shastri National Academy of Administration, and he wears a lot of hats, and he has shaped the career of many civil servants and wrote extensively on the civil services in India. Now, I would like to invite Professor Partha Pratim Chakrabarti, who is the key pillar of the National Digital Library of India, to formally welcome our resource person and the audience. Over to Professor Chakrabarti.
Thank you, Dr. Vignesh. Again, in the second part of this series of interactions, it is my pleasure and privilege to welcome Dr. Sanjeev Chopra. As Dr. Vignesh mentioned, he is superannuated as the director of the Lal Bahadur Shastri National Academy of Administration in March 2021, after putting in 36 years in the Indian Administrative Service. So, having trained, shaped, and built many such budding IAS officers, I think he is one of the most competent and, in my personal opinion, extremely knowledgeable in so many fields that I think the nation has benefited a lot from him, and I hope many of you will do so in this interaction like many others did in the last one. He served in many capacities, as well as the District Magistrate of Murshidabad, Secretary to the Industrial Development and Information Technology Departments of the governments, the Additional Chief Secretary in the Departments of Agriculture and Industry. He was the Mission Director for the National Horticulture Mission and the National Mission on Micro Irrigation and MD of NAFED and National Horticulture Board, and looking after international cooperation in the Ministry of Agriculture. He holds a PhD in management besides degrees in law, history, and literature. So you can make out how versatile he is. And he has held the Herbert H. Humphrey Fellow at Cornell and the Robert S. McNamara Fellow at the World Bank. He has been elected into very elite academy societies. He is a fellow of the Royal Asiatic Society of Great Britain, a fellow and affiliate of the Lakshmi Mittal and Family South Asia Institute at Harvard. He is also a distinguished fellow of the United Services Institute, India's oldest think tank on national security issues. Besides all this, our relationship with him has also been through the Valley of Words, a literature and arts festival, as well as a very powerful movement on literature, where he helps get budding as well as mature people to discuss literature and disseminate it into the nooks and corners of the country, translate it, get many things happen. So, with this, I welcome Dr. Sanjeev Chopra, person whom I admire a lot, and I request him to give his initial remarks on the topic of today. Dr. Chopra.
Thank you very much, Partha. It's you're always very kind and very gracious with your words and your, what should I say? I mean, I'm really bowled over. Thank you so much. It's been wonderful. This partnership with NDLI has been really, really, really wonderful. I think it's a symbiotic relationship. We at the Value of Words have learned a lot from the NDLI, and our association with the IIT Kharagpur and the NDLI has been absolutely fantastic. And together we are also celebrating the KM Panikkar Reading Month, which starts tomorrow. So thank you very much, Partha, for inviting me and for connecting me to so many students and connecting me to so many NDLI clubs. Because and it's actually a wonderful partnership because I'm a student of literature and history and liberal arts, and here this is this wonderful partnership between one of the most cerebral technology and science institutions in the country. So with these few words, and I must thank Vignesh also, the fellow JNUite, for getting us all together. So friends, as Vignesh mentioned, the UPSC has just announced its civil services results, and we are all very keen to know what happens once you join the civil services. So, what I'll do is I'll briefly tell you about training at the Lal Bahadur Shastri National Academy of Administration, and even the aspect of district training, which is very important, and also about Mission Karmyogi, which, as the Prime Minister mentioned on 20th August 2 years ago, is going to be a lifelong process of understanding how civil servants should continuously evolve themselves, because gone are the days when you learned something and then you couldn't continue with it for the rest of your life because uh, you know things are changing, situations are changing, technology is fast improving, and most importantly, the expectations that people have from government and governance is also evolving very rapidly. But let's start with the training at the academy. You see, and let me also say that the LBS National Academy of Administration is of course the first and foremost training institution for the IAS officers, but it is also the training institution for all non-technical civil services in the country. Therefore, in the foundation course, we train 22 civil services in the country, which is the IAS, the IPS, the Forest Service, the Foreign Service, the audits, the income tax, the accounts, the railways, and 22 services. I mean, all those who come from the UPSC stream, they're all trained together for the first 4 months at the LBS National Academy. And in recent years, we've also had the Indian Economic Service, the Indian Forest Service, and the Indian Statistical Service training with us. You see, one of the fundamental things about training in the academy is that we realize that your academic competence has already been tested by the UPSC. You've already been declared as the finest and the best brains in the country. So it is not academics that we're going to be talking about at the LBS Academy. It is about three other traits which are so important. Because one of the things that we got to realize, the dilemma is that you are selected as an individual. You have been certified as a bright individual. But throughout your life, you have to work in teams. And throughout your life, you will be working on issues on which no one individual can provide a solution. So, whether it is drinking water, or whether it is a rural road, whether it is even Swachhata Abhiyan or anything, there is not one thing that you do in public space which can be done by you as an individual. Therefore, one of the excuse me, one of the first things that we try to inculcate in you when you join the LBS Academy is that it's all about teamwork, it's about communication, and it's about negotiation. Let me elaborate these terms more. You see, working as an exceptional individual is very different from working as a team. And teamwork is something which helps you evolve your personality. Because it's not just a question of how well you are doing. Your strength lies in the team that you are creating around you, and you have to be a very keen and a very active participant in that team. And in order to be a good team player, you need to be able to communicate well. Often, when we talk about communication, we think that communication is what we tell the other person, is what we are saying to the other person. But this is only half of communication. The other and the more important part of communication is the ability to listen. There's that old saying that God has given us two ears and one mouth, which means that our attention to listening has to be double than our our effort to talk. Therefore, in team building, it is very important that we understand communication, both written and oral, and more importantly, the ability to understand what is being said to us. And remember that communication may not always be written. Communication can be through signs, it can be through symbols, it can be through posture. Very simple thing. When you're sitting in a group and you are not showing interest in the conversation around you, even then you're communicating. When you're sitting in an office and you are not looking the other person in the eye, you're part of a meeting, you could be chairing that meeting or you could be part of a meeting, and you could, by your non-verbal communication, also communicate a lot. So that is the second aspect of communication, which is a part of the team work which I talked about. And third very important aspect is negotiations, because remember that in life you cannot always get what you want. It is always a question of understanding what the other person expects of you, also being able to explain to the other person that what is it that you expect of him or her, and how do you sort of get into a balance, get into some sort of an the very famous word adjustment. How do you understand what can be done and what cannot be done? And how do we do it in the academy? We do it by ensuring that all your learning is group based. Not all, but most of your learning is group based. You're sent out on treks, you're sent out on village visits, you set out to perform your plays, you take part in various sports and activities. Again, the purpose of the Himalayan trek is not to see the Himalayas. It's not just to appreciate the flora and fauna. Of course, that is a part of the trek. But more than understanding and appreciating the flora and fauna around the Himalayas, it is a question of working together. How do you take everybody along? How do you live in shortages? How do you pitch up your tent? How do you talk to the caregivers? How do you talk to everybody around you? And you are challenging your own ability, not only for yourself, but also being able to take the weakest member of your team along with you. That is the real success of a good trek group. A good trek group is not one which climbs the highest peak. A good trek group is one in which you sing the same songs, in which you talk the same coda, in which you become friends and friends for life. Because the very important thing to understand is that, after all, the civil services, apart from other things, it's also about networking. It is also about the ability to develop a level of confidence and trust. And this trust and confidence is not something that you can teach in a classroom or not something that you can learn in a classroom. It's something that happens when you're interacting with each other, when you're interacting with your peers. And remember that this is a very, very important aspect of our training. Then again, there is the village visit during the foundation course, in which there is exposure to the life, it's I mean, of course, in our times, uh, a lot of India used to live in the villages. Of course, India is urbanizing now, and and a lot of people are migrating from the rural to the urban, but the rural continues to have 65 to 70% of our population. And therefore, the way village institutions work, the way interaction takes place at the panchayat level, the way power equations work, the way classes and castes and communities interact with each other, that is something that you observe during your village visit. Now, one of the most important events in the foundation course is called Arambh. Now, this Arambh was an initiative which was launched by the Prime Minister in the year 2019. I'm very happy and proud to say that 2019 I was the director of the Lal Bahadur Shastri Academy when it was first rolled out. And the Prime Minister came and addressed us at the Statue of Unity at Kevadia in Gujarat. Now, why was this Arambh thought of and what is this Arambh about? You know, during one of his visits to the academy, the Prime Minister was not very happy to observe that the training for different services is being held in three different institutions. And he felt that this is creating silos from day one. After all, the training of IAS is not complete unless the IAS knows how to work with the IPS, unless the IAS and the IPS understand that they also have to work with accounts people, with audit people, that together with the Indian Foreign Service, we have to project the image of India, that the protection of environment is equally important and you cannot protect the environment and the wildlife unless the Forest Service is involved, and that in order to secure economic security for the country, GST has to be rolled out, and therefore you do need to understand customs, you need to understand excise, you need to understand tax policy. So everybody has to work together. So the Prime Minister felt that everybody must start with a common foundation, not just about what is happening in the country today, but thinking about the future. Because in our times, we were interested in past precedents. That in 1985, for example, we were told that, all right, in 1976, this happened, in 1972, this happened, in 1968, this happened, so this is good, this is good, this is good, follow that. The change today is that the Prime Minister said that don't just think about past precedent, think about future possibilities. Because future possibilities are far more pertinent, far more relevant to the civil servant today. Because remember, all of you who join the civil service today would be at the helm in 2047 when India marks the 100th year of our independence. That is why we use the word Amrit Kal. We've entered the Amrit Kal, the 25 years of India's independence. So, Aram was a program which was launched in 2019 and has continued for the next 2 years, even though there was COVID. And the purpose in Aram is to expose the youngest civil servants of this country to the senior-most civil servants of the country and civil servants from across the world and governance professionals from across the World Bank, Singularity University, Institute of the Future, and all such thought leaders who can make a lasting impression on the young civil servants of this country. Therefore, the Aram is conceptualized where those who join the civil service will be working on themes which are very topical and very relevant. For example, these are themes on Atmanirbhar Bharat. These could be themes on how does India become the agriculture superpower of the world, for instance. How do you ensure that the global food security becomes an opportunity for India to ensure that its farmers get the competitive edge that is required. There could be a group which is working on health issues. There's a group which will be working on education. There's a group which will work on economic prosperity. And in fact, in the very first Aram, we were looking at the theme of how do we make India into a $5 trillion economy. And over the years, of course, now the group of secretaries, empowered group of secretaries, and this is something which was coordinated by Mr. Srinivas, the Director General of NCDG and the Secretary of DARPG. Now they're looking at India in 2047 as a $40 trillion economy. So the Aram is also about looking at future possibilities. I mean, looking at technologies, looking at disruption, and looking at how do you create situations, or how do you create the environment in which both growth and equity and equality go together, go hand in hand. Because remember that India is today on the cusp of a great demographic dividend. So if we can make use of this demographic dividend, we would have emerged as one of the strongest and most prosperous and most equitable societies in the world. So these are some of the things that happen in the foundation course where all the services are together. After the foundation course, the IAS, of course, goes for the winter study tour, and all the other services, they go to their respective training institutions. The winter study tour is again a fascinating journey where you see the length and breadth of the country, where you see the difficult conditions in which the army works, whether it is in Kargil or it is in Siachen or it is in Arunachal. the officers also visit public sector, they visit the private sector, they visit, they visit factories, and they get to see the different facets of life in the country. And after that, they settle down for what is called the professional phase one, in which the emphasis now is more IS oriented, in the sense that there is emphasis on law, economics, public administration, and many other things. And then we go in for something called 51-year long district attachment, where the young officer is attached to a district magistrate and understands all the different departments of the district administration. So, for some days he's attached to the judiciary, for some days he's attached to the superintendent of police, some days he's attached to the civil surgeon or the chief medical officer of health. So, in effect, the IS officer gets an opportunity to understand how the district administration runs, and he or she also gets a chance to hold an independent charge as a block development officer or as a revenue officer. All this takes place in 51 months, which is a very interesting and a very fascinating period in one's life. I was very fortunate. I, in fact, got trained in two districts. I went for my training first to Purulia, and then I would say I was very fortunate because there was a major shortage of officers in Darjeeling. And if you recall, there was a major agitation in the Darjeeling Hills for a separate Gorkhaland state, spearheaded by the GNLF, and therefore we were inducted in the district administration of Darjeeling while I was still a probationer. So it was a fascinating experience. Then you come back to the academy for just 6 weeks to take a review and a recap and understand how district administration works in different corners of the country. Because the best practices in Kerala could be different from the best practices in Punjab. There would be some good initiatives that have been taken in Srinagar, very different from the experiences that could have been there in Mahabalipuram. So it's a time to understand the best practices across the country, and we also give the officers an opportunity to interact with young subdivisional officers and with district magistrates, with CEOs of Zilla Panchayats and municipal commissioners. So this is the first 2 years of training, after which, again, another initiative which was taken by at the behest of the Prime Minister was the Assistant Secretaries program. So what happens is that after this 2 years probation is complete, officers are attached to different ministries and departments as assistant secretaries for a period of 3 months. And they understand the various flagship schemes of the Government of India, so that when they go to the district, they'll be able to understand what was the thought behind the conceptualization of the scheme. I'll give you a very small example. As subdivisional officers or as DMs or as officers responsible for agricultural development, be implementing scheme like the Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana. At the district level, it is only an implementation objective. But if you are in the agriculture ministry as an assistant secretary, you will understand what was the larger thinking behind the Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana. It was to insulate the farmer from the market risk and from the risk of climate. Essentially, the farmer faces two risks: the risk of weather, he doesn't know when it's going to rain, and he doesn't know what will be the value of the crop. So, in a way, it is trying to insulate the farmer from weather risks and from risks of the market. So, that is the conceptual philosophy of the Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana. So, when an officer spends some time in the ministry, he gets to understand what was the thought process which led to the formation of a policy which is now being implemented on the ground. And he spends 3 months in different ministries, and mostly these are ministries which have a direct bearing on implementation of various programs on the ground. So most likely it will be ministries of agriculture, health, education, drinking water, sanitation, which have a direct impact on life in the districts and of life of large number of stakeholders. So this is how an officer gets trained, and then of course the growth trajectory of an officer is well known. But I will just very briefly mention it before I open it up to questions, because I'm sure that you have more questions and more queries than we have the time to respond to. So after about a year and a half as a sub-divisional officer, an IAS officer graduates to be an additional district magistrate or the CEO of a Zilla Panchayat or a municipal commissioner. And in the 7th or 8th year, you become the district magistrate, which is one of the most fascinating jobs which has been created. One of the most fascinating jobs because you're in charge of almost everything in the district. And being in charge of almost everything means that you can understand the connections. You can understand the connection between, say, good roads, fewer accidents, and trauma centers. You see, if the motor vehicles are inspected properly and regularly, the possibility of accidents on the highways gets reduced. If you have effective policing, it helps. If you can have, under the Smart Cities program, CCTV cameras across the city, it's even easier to find out who is doing the traffic violation. And in fact, the challan can be sent to the person he may not even know that this is happening. So, district administration and heading the district administration is a fascinating experience. And after the first 10 years, then you, of course, graduate and move to the state government as a director or as a secretary. And then, but I think let's not talk about that because it's a long road. Let me say that every job in the civil service is very exciting. It's fascinating because, and now there is scope for officers to pick up one or two areas in which they would specialize, and then they can continue to grow more and more in the chosen field of specialization. Under Mission Karam Yogi, the officers are expected to continue their learning in a particular field and then develop their expertise and continue developing this in their third, fourth, and fifth phases of mid-career training programs, which are conducted at the LBS National Academy of Administration. So, what happens now is that in case you're interested in infrastructure, then you will be learning more about infrastructure. And when you come for your training, you will be given more focused inputs on infra. Because the idea is that we have to evolve ourselves, not just as people who follow rules. Rules have to be followed, but as people who have been given a certain role and a responsibility. And therefore, if some rules have to be changed, the onus of suggesting changes on those rules is also upon the civil servant. Civil servants have to work in partnership with the political leadership. And again, it's important that we understand that relationships cannot be built on confrontation. Relationships have to be built by understanding what is it that the political executive expects of you, what is it that you expect of the political executive. And I think a frank and fair conversation always helps. I'll go back to where I started from. Training and your life in the civil services is not about individual brilliance. Your individual brilliance got you to this job, but your success in this job will depend on how you work as a member of a team. Over years, you will be the leader of this team. And when you are the leader of a team, how do you take everybody along? That is very, very important. Because, let me again repeat, it is not your individual excellence, it is not your individual hard work, but it will be the collective hard work of everybody which will help us make India a great and a strong country. Let me close my comments here and be happy to respond to your questions. Thank you, Professor Partha Chakrabarti, for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for this very brief and wonderful insights about the training and the life of a civil servant. So so participants, you can put in your questions in the comments box. So we will put it to Dr. Sanjeev Chopra for his response. So before move to the participants, I have few questions noted down for you, sir. The first and foremost question is like, as you rightly pointed out, you have people coming in from all backgrounds. They will be coming from a different language background. They will be coming from different cultural backgrounds, and they will be coming from different what you call distances. So, how easy or difficult is it to train them with a very different set of group of people? Is it easy, or how you find it challenging to train all of them at the same level?
Well, thank you, Vignesh. You see, I think most people, I would go to the extent of saying that about 85 to 90% of our officers are keen to learn. They're very keen participants in the training process. Look, let's also understand that it's very difficult to make it to the civil services. For many, it is a dream come true. For many, in fact, for a majority of the people, in fact, 90% of those who enter the portals of the academy, for them, it is the second or the third or the fourth attempt, right? So they're all looking forward to being in the academy. They're all looking forward to joining us in this journey of exploration. Now, we are not, there is no reluctance to learn. There is a lot of willingness to learn. And I think it's very important to understand that, especially in the foundation course and in the professional courses also, but certainly in the FC, because the entire focus is not on academics, the focus is on group work, the focus is on working together, the focus is on organizing a debate, participating, you know, and learning from each other. So I think once the officers also begin to realize that they're not in a classroom situation. They're in a situation where they are learning to walk together, do the drill together, do the march past together, organizing things together. And in fact, I use the term co-learning. A lot of the teaching, a lot of the learning, let's not use the word teaching, a lot of the learning in the academy is co-learning, because from managing the mess to organizing the debates to organizing the socials to organizing a trek or to organize horse riding or whatever, I mean, everything is being done. And I think another very important thing is that because all the officers get involved with various clubs. We also ensure that their seating changes every 3 days. So, the whole idea is to encourage people to talk to each other. So it's a positive, and of course the hills of Missouri are very conducive places to make new friendships. So I think the environment, the fact that you are in Missouri, the fact that there are clouds, and the fact that there is beautiful flora and fauna. So I think the whole, what should I say, the entire ecosystem is one in which you want to make friends. So I think that's it. I still very, very clearly recall, 24th of August, 1985, when I had joined the academy. And, we started making friends. In fact, we made friends right at the railway station. We became friends even while we were traveling in the train, because, when three of us in that compartment got to know that we were all going to the Missouri Academy, we all became friends. Right there, I mean, even before the train reached Dehradun, we'd become friends. We got more friends when we sort of took a shared taxi, five people getting into one ambassador car. I don't know whether this generation even remembers ambassador cars, but Partha would remember. The ambassador car was a great car. So five of us got into that car, put our luggage on the top, and we became friends. So it's in the air, as they say. They
So
have
there is a
this.
question from one of the participants. What are the challenges come to civil servant, and how do they overcome these challenges?
See, there are multiple challenges which come in front of a civil servant. Let me classify them in a certain manner. Now, there are certain challenges which we are equipped to handle, and there are certain challenges that we are not equipped to handle. The challenges that we are equipped to handle are challenges of coordination, challenges in case of a natural disaster, challenges in case of issues of law and order, challenges as happened in the time of COVID, challenges for which a clear protocol is laid down. For example, if COVID happens, or if there is disease or pestilence or something, there's a very clear code that is written that this is what has to be done, this is what has to be done, this is what has to be done. So there are no real problems in that. The challenge is, as I think the point which he also wanted to make, the biggest challenge is the ability to work with other people, and especially when your views and that of the political executive may not be in conformity with each other. Now, that is the time when your knowledge of the law, when your knowledge of what the Constitution of India says, what the latest judicial pronouncements on the subject say, what the norms expect, that is what will help. You see, for example, and I think we have to be able to make use of judicial precedent. We have to be able to make use of the extant laws. We have to be able to also sometimes make the reference to the fact that, look, in this day and age of RTI, everything is transparent. I think the officer today is much more empowered than at the time when I was a district magistrate. Because when I was a district magistrate in 1994, at that time I did not have this as an argument in my arsenal. Today, a district magistrate will certainly have this in the arsenal that, look, if you want me to, to give a certain preference to someone, I mean, 6 months later, somebody will pay 10 rupees and ask, how did you do it? So, what will be the answer? So, it's not embarrassment for the district, but it's more an embarrassment for the political leadership. Therefore, transparency has stepped in. The other structural change that has happened is that now more and more programs of the government are becoming all inclusive, and there is the great support that we get from IT. So the challenges of the civil servant in the years to come are going to be of a different nature, and there are ways to address these challenges. And I think the best way to handle a challenge is by having an open communication platform. That's how I would like to respond.
So another question from a participants, could you explain more about the objective of Bharat Darshan, the trip that
Yeah, you see, Bharat Darshan, what happens is that because all of us, very few of us come from a defense background. The first and the foremost objective of the Bharat Darshan is to spend time with the defense forces of the country. Because unless we see how our defense forces are functioning, unless we see the difficult conditions in which they are operating, we will not be able to relate to them. And many of the people, in fact, most of the Jawans, I mean, let's not talk about the officer class, because the officer class is in a position to handle its own affairs. But as far as the Jawans are concerned, most of them would have some issue back home. It could be a land related dispute, it could be a minor property matter, it could be a domestic issue, it could be his brother wanting a taxi permit, or general harassment from the. So we are in a position to understand how difficult it is for the Jawan who is guarding our border. So that is one of the first objectives, and also you get to know how vast and how great this country is. Because in the course of Bharat Darshan, I mean, like, let me go back to my Bharat Darshan. We started with Akhnur in Jammu Kashmir, right? Akhnur in Jammu Kashmir, and my attachment was the 7th Sikh Light Infantry. Now, I did not know much about 7th Sikh Light Infantry, but having spent 15 days with 7th Sikh Light Infantry, I have a sort of a feeling for the 7th Sikh Light Infantry. And we moved from there, went to Betul in Madhya Pradesh. I mean, crossing all these areas. Went up to Cochin, went then to the western parts of the country. So, in the course of 2 months, you spend so much time traveling. Those days only by rail, but these days they're traveling more because you've got flights. So, so you get to see, and I think seeing this country is a great experience in itself. In fact, that's what Rana Day told Mahatma Gandhi. Rana Day told Mahatma Gandhi that, before you start making any policy about India, before you start thinking or writing about India, why don't you travel India? Why don't you go around and see? And when you travel this country, you find remarkable diversity, and you find remarkable commonality, and and you learn such a lot when you are traveling. It's a great, great, great experience. So I think, oh, I forgot. So that is the first part of it. And then you understand, you get attached to the private sector. These days, people get attached to PPP projects, for instance. People get attached to the Bangalore airport, where they see that the airport, now, entire airport is now coming up in the PPP mode. So there is the Larsen and Tubro, there is a foreign company, there is an Indian company, there is the state government. So how does large acquisition take place? That's something people get attached to large NGOs. They see how things happen. So I think it is more in the nature of mental exposure, more in the nature of also of understanding that however complex a problem is, there are solutions to problems. So I think those are some of the things that we learned during Bharat Darshan. Now, what are the advantages and disadvantages of a civil servant job? Let me first count what I think there are more advantages than disadvantages. The only disadvantage which I find is that you have to shift your house very often, and it is quite bad. I mean, packing and moving place to place is a tough is a tough job. It's not very pleasant. I mean, so I think that is the one thing, and your children and your spouse also, they have to travel quite a bit with you, and many times there is a family separation that happens. But those are the disadvantages. The advantages far outweigh the disadvantages. I mean, the biggest advantage is the profile of the job that you're doing. Let me put it like this: that at in your early 30s, you get to manage a district which which is which is a which is a fascinating experience. I mean, at the age of 32, I was district magistrate of Murshidabad, a district which at that point of time had a population of 6.5 million. Now it's a population of about 8 to 9 million. Where in the wide world can you sit for a competitive exam and end up handling such a complex thing? And it's an end in itself. I mean, managing a district, it's not just about managing, it's about growth. It's about your sense of empowerment. As the Agriculture Secretary of West Bengal, we launched what is called the Bangla Fasal Bima Yojana, in which we tried to cover every single farmer in Bengal with a Kisan credit card and give him crop insurance. Now that is a satisfaction which is indescribable, and it's a satisfaction which is beyond anything. So it's a fascinating thing. I mean, as the mission director of the National Horticulture Mission, I have great pride when I say that today the Indian horticulture produce exceeds the Indian cereal produce in weight, volume, and value. So I'm very closely identified with this mission, right? Or NEFED, when you're procuring, and when you're procuring apples from Jammu Kashmir, when everything was closed during COVID. So NEFED moved in, procured apples. Now, you also realize that you're doing a great national service when you're doing this. Okay. There's a question on the Indian Foreign Service. How do they function? What are the challenges they face? I think the Foreign Service is a very interesting, very challenging, and a very meaningful job, more so today. Because you see, let's also realize the fact that in our time, we still had the developing country tag, right? So the way we were looked at was very different from the way we are looked at now. Today, India is the fastest growing economy in the world. Fastest growing economy in the world. We carry a certain weight about us. And not only that, India now has a very prominent position, whether it is the G8, whether it is the G20, whether it is the BRICS, whether it is so many international fora. So India is today taking the lead in most of the international negotiations, whether it is the international negotiation for climate change, whether it is the international negotiations for chemical weapons control, or it is the international negotiations for geographical indicators. Today, India's position is such that we lead the direction. And therefore, I think the Foreign Service, and those who will be diplomats in the coming years, will have a very, very important role to project the image of India abroad. So I think it's a great, and in fact, all jobs are great. So if you're fond of travel, if you're fond of languages, then I suggest that you must take up the Foreign Service. How can I encourage and help students as a librarian? Very important, because I think the librarians play a very crucial and a very critical role. I think apart from curating newspaper columns, newspaper articles, not only in English but also in the regional languages, because I think as a librarian, it's very important for us to ensure that we are able to provide reading material in bhashas of Bharat, to those who are appearing from various centers across the country. Fortunately or unfortunately, material in English is abundantly available. But material in Punjabi or Kannada or Marathi or Tamil or Telugu is not as abundantly available as it is in English and Hindi. So I think as librarians, it's very important for us to ensure that we can provide reading material in Bhashas of Bharat to all those who are attempting the civil services exam in the Bhashas of Bharat. So that is going to be a very important. Secondly, I think it's important for librarians to be able to create a separate section in the library where books on civil services can be kept. And one more thing can be done by librarians, and that is to keep books written by a former civil servant. That doesn't mean that I say it because my book is coming out, so that will also be part of this this library. But in general, I think it's very important that if people read Surendranath Banerjee, for example, I mean, the first book written by a civil servant was by Surendranath Banerjee. It's called A Nation in the Making, right? In the academy, we set up a section called The Making of a Nation. Because, when Surendranath Banerjee wrote it, at that time, it was a nation in the making. Now, the nation is made. So now we call that section The Making of a Nation. Now, that will inspire people to, become civil servants. That will inspire people to read about civil services because remember, there is a civil servant who's there. I mean, all districts or all regions in this country produce some civil servant or the other. Therefore, somebody will relate to, I mean, if you are from the hills, you might relate more to Mr. Pandey or to Mr. Pant. If you're from Punjab, you might relate to Mr. Kapoor. If you're from Bengal, you might relate more to Mr. Banerjee, and so on and so forth. So I think it's important to stock books written by civil servants, ex-civil servants, and their translation so that people get inspired. Okay, the scope IRS is generally used to describe both the income tax and the customs and central excise services. So the scope of the IRS is also fantastic because after all, you see, there was a time when the country was primarily agricultural, and for an agricultural economy, the revenue services did not matter that much. But as the economy is becoming more and more urban, as the services and the manufacturing are playing a much greater role in our GDP, the role of the revenue services has to increase. You are going to be civil servants of 2047. And in 2047, India is aspiring to be a $40 trillion economy. So obviously, if you're a $40 trillion economy, even though I'm very fond of agriculture, I spend a lot of my time in agriculture, this 40 trillion cannot come from agriculture. The share of GDP of agriculture will go down, and the share of manufacturing and services and GST and goods, and therefore it's going to be, and the number of international transactions is going to increase, and therefore it's going to be a fascinating job. Okay. Now, the number of services, the 22 services which come under the UPSC exam, this time the railway services at first said that they will not be part of the UPSC exam, but finally the railways have also become part of the UPSC exam. So these are all available on the website, so I don't need to spend too much time on this. But it ranges from the class 1 services, and we also do, the UPSC also does the recruitment for the Puducherry Civil Service, the Goa Civil Service, the police services, and also the DANIX and the DANIPS, which is the Delhi Andaman Nicobar Civil Service and Police Service. Tell me something more about special forces and wings and cyber experts. Now, they are not, special forces are not really taken from the civil services. They are drawn, yes, there are some IPS officers who may go on deputation to the National Security Guards and to the SPG, but this is not covered from the civil services perspective. Police officers do become cyber crime experts, but that's a specialized field. But these are also areas in which the specialists also have a major role to play. And that is why, you see, these civil services, let me put things in perspective. Civil services are for general administration. They're meant for general policing, general tax laws, general thing. But as the country will evolve, we will need to get a lot of experts. And that is what is lateral entry about. That, everything is fine, but you might need a very specific input in a specific field. For example, in the Ministry of Agriculture, we had an expert. We needed an expertise on cold chain. We needed expertise on understanding how the large logistics movement of cold chain would happen in the country, because this was a new field, and therefore we had a professional by the name of Vignesh join us and take the lead in the National Center for the National Center for Cold Chain Development. So there would be obviously certain areas which require a very specific input. It could be on cybercrime, it could be on cyber technology, it could be on forensics. So that's those are the things. Something about the ranks. Now, all right, ranks. The term ranks we use mostly in reference to police and uniformed services. So, in the case of the IPS, you start as an assistant superintendent of police. You and that's the time when you wear your stars. Then you graduate to become an additional SP. When you wear the stump, the Ashok stump. Then you become a senior superintendent of police or a commissioner. Then you become a deputy inspector general. Then you become an inspector general. Then you become an additional director general, and then you become the director general of police, which is when you have 3 stars on your card, right? It's only the generals of India. I mean, the chief of the staff, chief of the army staff, navy, and air force. They have 4 stars. The rest of them are 3 stars. Yes, engineering. In fact, the beauty of the IAS now, or the civil services exam, is that you have a general compulsory paper, which is meant for everybody, and there's one optional paper. That optional paper gives you a lot of scope. I mean, you could be studying computer engineering, or you could be studying philosophy, or you could be studying anthropology. You've got to be good at your subject. And so that's it. But a lot of areas are common. For instance, the paper on general studies, general knowledge, ethics, general essay, these are common subjects. And then, of course, you can do computer engineering or civil engineering or whatever you are most comfortable with. Remember, you must enjoy your year of preparation. Do not pick up a subject unless you enjoy it. Because if you don't enjoy reading that subject, you will not, you know, you will not enjoy the preparation. Now, Srishti, the one and the only strategy about the UPSC exam is consistent hard work, and there is a method in this consistent hard work. I would suggest that you spend an equal amount of time in reading and writing. At the end of the day, the examiner is only being able to check what you have written on your answer sheet. And that is a major problem. While many people are preparing, people spend a lot of their time in reading a lot, little realizing that you have very limited time to answer the question. Again, preparing for the civil services is not you're not doing a PhD thesis on that. For instance, if you're asked about the First Amendment to the Constitution, you don't have to read 10 books about the First Amendment to the Constitution. It's not going to get you more than 20 marks in the UPSC, right? So the UPSC will give you, I mean, if you have written the answer very well, you'll probably get 18 or 19, because it's an essay type question. You have to therefore understand very clearly it's written that the level of questions that will be given to you would be of honors standard, BA honors, MA, somewhere in between. So that's the level that you have to study. A lot of people go into lot of in-depth study. That is not required. I'm not saying it has to be superficial. I'm saying that it has to be sufficient that you can attempt your answers well. It doesn't have to be superficial, but you cannot dig yourself deep into that subject, because it's so. And that time I mentioned this, for example, Citizenship Act. So you need to understand some basics about this. You need to know about India's space, technology. You need to know about, the new education policy. You are not going to become an expert on new education policy, but you need to know how is this new education policy different from the previous education policy. What are the difficulties in implementing this new education policy? Because the new education policy could be very fine on paper, but you, at the same time, ought to be able to say that, look, this is very nice, but there are 11 lakh schools in this country. Of these 11 lakh schools in this country, a vast majority of schools are single teacher schools. So, in order to be able to implement the NEP, you need to increase the number of. So, it's a very general sort of a thing. You don't have to be an expert, and yet your knowledge should not be plainly superficial. So, somewhere in between. I hope I've been able to respond to you.
Sure, sir. So I have one final question from my end before Professor Chakrabarti takes it. So these days, the lateral entry recruitment have started by UPSC. So what are your takes on that lateral entry part, sir?
You see, if the lateral entry, as I explained to you, there are certain positions in the government which call for expertise. Earlier, and let me tell you, lateral entry has always been taking place. I mean, earlier it was very arbitrary. In fact, the ex-prime minister of this country was also a lateral entrant. Montek Singh Ahluwalia was a lateral entrant. P.N. Dhar was a lateral entrant. So lateral entry has always been going on in this country. Now, now very clearly, there is an advertisement for lateral entry, and the lateral entry is being done through the UPSC. And in that interview panel, the members of that ministry are also sitting. Therefore, it's become a more transparent process. I would, in fact, go to the extent of arguing that now lateral entry has become a transparent mechanism of bringing in expertise to the government where it is critically required. Right? Earlier, you had lateral entry, but you didn't consult the UPSC. It was being done in a rather arbitrary manner. Now, it's not to say that those who came in as lateral entrants, I mean, one is not questioning their competence or their commitment to this country. But the procedure must be fair, it must be transparent. More importantly, it must appear to be fair and it must appear to be transparent, because that is what governance is about. It's about sending a message. It's about sending a message that we are all equal and we live in a democratic society where things are done by norms as laid down by the law. That's how I would like to respond to the question.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for the wonderful insights. Now I request Professor Chakrabarti to take it forward.
Sanjeev, this is so fascinating. But for a computer scientist like me, I will recall there is only one computer scientist who has won the highest computer science prize called the Turing Award and the Nobel Prize in Economics. And he is the founder of AI. So he is called Herbert Simon, if you have heard of him.
Yeah, I've
Yeah,
heard of Herbert.
So Herb Simon said that most engineers solve hard optimization problems. But in real life, in human in the loop situations, the problems are different. They are not solving problems for optimizing or designing a machine or something like that. What you are describing is a very interesting mechanism by which you have negotiation, you have multi-party objectives, you have objectives that everybody must be satisfied in, and the policy must be implemented, and you must reach an optimal middle ground, which is even far beyond Nash equilibrium, which is scientific Nash equilibrium for which Nash got the Nobel Prize. So I would, be very keen to, if you can share with us a few such examples of how these problems were solved or addressed, then we can convert it into a more scientific and transparent reasoning. And I'm very keen to, at this fag end of my academic career, which does not end anyway, I think, y'all are listing problems which are absolutely important for governance. And for that, if we can bring in scientific solutions for such human in the loop problems, I think we will reach a new dimension. My feeling is that the case studies that you all have in problem solving would be remarkable problem domains for fields like AI, which does not address such kinds of problems.
Absolutely.
So I would look forward to your book And I would look forward to a future book where you would list out all these problems for
No, no,
future generations to solve.
the future book is something that we can collaborate on. That's something that
Yes, yes,
we need to
yes,
work
yes.
together and collaborate on. But let me end by with a new word that I've just picked up today. It's called humility. That is being humble and being able. So when you combine humility with ability, you know that is what young civil servants can look forward to. And remember also, as Professor Partha said, we can learn from the human problem. The human dimension of the problem is the most difficult dimension. I mean, how do you deal with such situations? And sometimes just a smile will solve the problem. Sometimes just holding the hand of the other person will solve the problem. Sometimes just giving a patient hearing will solve the problem, which no amount of codes can help you sort out. Somebody is, an accident has taken place. What do you do? I mean, you can rush the body to the. Very simple human, situations. I mean, there is this rule that the post-mortem cannot be conducted after sunset. Now, this was a rule which was made when adequate light was not available. Now, obviously, you sometimes realize that, and this exception can be given only by district magistrate. So I've used this many times. That इतना accident हो गया, सब बर्बाद हो गया. It's a clear case of an accident, in a road accident. Now and the persons want I don't want to end on this. There's not, but what I'm saying is that there are many things, many human aspects where you can sort of make a lot of difference. But thank you so much for this great opportunity. And I would like to share the experience which I shared at the end of my district training. In those days, Purulia had a lot of leprosy. It was a leprosy endemic area. And a lot of people used to say that leprosy is not, you don't get it by the touch of the hand. It's not communicable and this and that. Everybody would write it. And yet it was not creating that impact. So I decided that as a young assistant magistrate, let me just go and have tea in the families of those who've been afflicted by leprosy. Let me tell you, Professor Partha, that was a unique experience. Those people, felt, I mean, I just do not, you cannot understand or imagine the impact it had, because it was not something that you say, it is something that you can do, and it costs you nothing. And it's been such a great experience, just having tea. Sirpi, not very nice tea, but the happiness that I could give to a lot of people, I think that's been a very lasting impression in my life. And I think all of us, as senior civil servants, as junior civil servants, as professors, we can do a lot to reach out. Holding someone's hand in distress is something which no AI, which no robo, which no equation can solve. So being a good human being is the core of being a good civil servant. Let's close. Thank you very much. It was a great honor to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for the wonderful session. Participants, thanks for joining us for today's session. So all the NDLI Club registered participants can download the certificates on Monday evening. They can just log into their respective member panel and download the certificate from the event section. So with this, we are going to end the session. We once again thank Dr. Sanjeev Chopra, Professor Chakrabarti, and all the participants for making this session an excellent one. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, everyone.